Right, this is the Irish NFL Show's NFC East preview. We're looking ahead to the 2024-2025 season. We've done the Cowboys. We now move through to the Philadelphia Eagles, Brian, for whom the season ended very badly last year. I mean, limped into the playoffs when they looked like they were absolutely coasting at one point. And, we talked about this at length during the season last season. There was this sliding doors moment where it really looked like the Eagles were very much about to run it back and go one better. And then the wheels just dramatically came off the wagon. I mean, ending with that embarrassing playoff loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Seems like the loss of the two coordinators hurt them maybe more than people thought it was looking like it was doing at the start of the season. But there's more to the equation than that, isn't there?
It certainly felt like that come the end of the season. Sometimes you can watch a game and teams lose games, but it's kind of the manner of the performance and how the offense and defense looks on the field. And there was a lot of disinterested players, in particular that playoff game in Tampa. Players seem to be like pulling out of tackles and weren't as fully committed as we would have seen earlier on in the season. Obviously, the previous season, excuse me, when they went to the Super Bowl, and a lot of that came back on Sirianni. There was a lot of speculation, similar enough to the Cowboys, that they would move on from Sirianni a year removed from the Super Bowl. People may have thought that was ludicrous that would ever be the case, but a lot of rumblings that the players are falling out with him, that they didn't like the manner how he was coaching. But it's hard to believe that, bearing in mind the year before that they were so kind of drawn and attracted to how he kind of went about his coaching. I think his manner on the sideline at times is a bit off-putting for fans from particular teams in the NFC East.
Is that not fatal for him, Brian? Like, you come back to that old quote. I remember trotting it out at one stage during the season. I think it was Dan Rooney who said it, that even good coaches lose games, but great coaches never lose the locker room. Like, if your players are quitting on you visibly on the field, I don't know how you get back from there. Maybe you can paper over those cracks, and maybe winning solves everything if they start the season strongly. But I can't believe that players who are genuinely committed to a head coach and willing to play for him would ever do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to bear in mind that it was a very different feel last year. Like, again, sometimes, and you just on the offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, there's a kind of a unison between the coaching staff, which brings the team to the Super Bowl and ultimately gets the best out of certain players. Whilst you might not like the head coach, you may have a better relationship with the coaching staff, and ultimately that's sometimes who you play for as opposed to the head coach. But very clear and very evident towards the back end of the season. There were so many games towards the back end of the season where it just looked shambolic at times. Like the Week 18 defeat to the Giants, albeit they were probably thinking ahead to the playoffs, in particular the fact that the Cowboys on that night were comprehensively winning in Washington, and therefore the division was gone. But there was other games, and even going into the playoff game, the fact that they weren't even favourites against the Bucs, if I recall correctly, was strange. We never thought in a million years that would have been the case. There's a lot of question marks for me going into the season, but Sirianni's kind of back to the old Sirianni. I mean, we saw recently his tongue-in-cheek comments about Saquon Barkley signing for them in free agency and having kind of back and forth slanging matches with Giants fans. And a couple of months before that, he was begging to remain in situ as the head coach. So I think he's another one that is very much in that situation. And they brought in experienced coaching as well. They brought in the former defensive coordinator from the Dolphins, former Broncos head coach, name escapes me. I'm sure one of you can. Fangio's in. Like, that strikes me again. I know Colin said at the end of the season, similar to Zimmer in Dallas, that strikes me as a interim coach in waiting if Sirianni doesn't get what he wants out of the season and how he decides to pull the plug. Because he's another one that's in that kind of position. I feel that if things aren't going right, I wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles went a bit gung-ho here and moved on very quickly.
Kieran, Brian touched on Saquon there, who's obviously the big free agent acquisition during the season or during the off season. Eagles also made a couple of interesting draft picks, and I know the GM, Howie Roseman, like, it's such a cliche now, he's always getting flowers thrown at him. Everybody goes, oh, another masterstroke by Howie, who often, to be fair to him, just seems to do the obvious thing. Instead of trying to play chess or galaxy brain his way out of situations, they need cornerbacks, he drafts a couple of cornerbacks. They need a running back, well, he drafts or finds the best running back he can in Saquon Barkley. Simples.
Yeah, I mean, that's really it. He gets all the praise, but what stood out in the draft was picking up Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Everybody could see basically from, I think, the game against Buffalo where they just won on that long field goal. Everybody saw basically from mid-November onwards that the secondary was a huge problem for the Eagles, and addressing that was number one on Roseman's list. And again, do they need Saquon? Probably not. They probably would have been great without him again, but having Saquon in there is another huge another huge factor for the Eagles. I'm up on the Eagles. As much as I'm down on Dallas, I'm up on the Eagles. I think it's going to be their division. I think they've just solidified everywhere where they need to go. I mean, they did lose Mr. Kelsey, but they got Cam Jurgens who can just slot straight in there. So that's not a massive downgrade. And they also have Lane Johnson there on right tackle too. So they've their offense, it speaks for itself. AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, even without somebody like Saquon running it 30 times a game, is going to be putting up huge points too. I don't have as many concerns that I do as with the Cowboys. Sirianni, yes, maybe a similar situation with McCarthy. Maybe, like Brian said, maybe that's why they've got Kellen Moore and Fangio in there, kind of the tandem in the background, just in case anything does go south. I just think that they've just got too much, and they've reloaded. They have they've one of the top 5 O-lines in the game, definitely one of the top 10 D-lines in the game. And after shoring up that secondary issue, as well as getting Mr. Trotter Jr., Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in the draft, that's definitely helped their kind of secondary and the linebacking core. I don't see a huge amount of holes in this team. I don't see a huge amount of issues. Obviously, if Sirianni can stay on the sideline, that's going to be a big thing for them. But I think this is going to be a real big season for the Eagles. I think they reload and they come back and they say last year was just an aberration, and we're here for all the marbles this year.
Noel, if we said when we were talking about the Cowboys that, it's hard to believe that they are only 1 or 2 players away, and that, it's difficult to see why they're running it back and that they haven't done more. With the Eagles, as Kieran's just said there, 2 years ago, they're a holding call away from winning the Super Bowl. Like we thought they were that team then. They're no weaker now, with the possible honourable exception of Jason Kelsey having retired, which they, seem reasonably well equipped to replace. To be fair, they brought in Saquon. They seem to have drafted quite well and addressed a couple of roster spots of concern, particularly in the secondary, which was very weak for them last year. They have Jalen Hurts. They have their guy quarterback. They have an explosive offense around them. They brought in experienced coordinators. Really, there's no reason to believe this team shouldn't be contenders, right? Or am I wrong?
No, I think you're spot on. For me, in terms of the NFC, I think this is up there roster-wise with, say, the Lions and the 49ers. I just think they are loaded. I don't see any issues. I mean, Kieran mentioned the secondary was awful last year. I think it finished the 2nd worst in the league. But they went out and they addressed that. They bring in CJ Gardner. They bring in, as is mentioned, Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, and they kind of sort that issue out. They don't let it linger. We look at the offense. The offense is just awesome. I mean, as mentioned, Smith and Brown, Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert there. They sorted out a couple of the lads with their contracts, so they should be mentally in a good spot. So it does come down to coaching. We'll have a look at this coaching staff now, this new one coming in, and we'll see the attitude of the players. You don't want the end of last season to continue into the start of this one. So as we've mentioned, they've 2 new coordinators in there who are experienced, who, that won't be lost on them what happened last year. And that's why those guys are being brought in. And Sirianni will be on a bit of a short leash here now, because the Eagles, Howie Roseman has put together a great roster, and they've never been afraid to get rid of a coach who's either won games or being a big name. And I think they will feel like every team, there's a window. It kind of feels like the Dallas window is closing with the way it's going with McCarthy and Dak. But that Eagles window is still open, but they'll want to take advantage of that. And if Sirianni proves in this season that, things kind of go the way they ended last year, then I think they'll be looking for someone else to come in, because that roster shouldn't be finishing a season 1-5. That roster should be challenging all the way.